afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Team Tim. Oh my goodness, it's March 1st. Hard to believe we're heading into that last part of the first quarter. So us MSPs, those that are listening, you better start prepping your QBRs, right? Because we're heading into that new quarter, right? And if I was a VCSO, QBRs would be part of what we would be doing. I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard, where we help MSPs solve for the new NIST 2.0 govern function. We're here with our good friends from Tech ID Manager, but before we get into that, Mr. Schnurr, VCSO, Inquisitive IT. Say hello, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim Schnurr, VCSO focused on privacy, IP, malicious insider threat, and cybersecurity. Enough about me. Jesse, do you want to go? And then we'll talk to our guests.
Absolutely, my friend. Throw my Chicago accent on there a little bit today. Jesse Miller with Power PSA Consulting. We help MSPs build and scale security programs for profit, focusing on VCSO services. And I was laughing at your intro there, Tim, because I remember as an MSP CISO, this would be about the time of year when I realized, we have made zero progress on our OKRs for 2024. And we need to get those going because we're still playing cleanup from the beginning of the year. So I'm assuming that's what's going on in a lot of people's heads right now.
Yeah.
With
definitely.
that, Martin, why don't you say hello?
Yeah, I'm Martin White, founder and CTO of Tech ID Manager. Super glad to be here. You want to go, Emily?
Sure. Emily with Tech ID Manager. I am the engagement manager for Tech ID Manager, keeping my finger on the pulse.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. So, I don't know, this feels like it kind of half up my alley today, talking about all these I am Pam. No, actually, I'm Pepe, right? Identity access management, privilege access, all the acronyms around who, what, where, when, how, why, right? As we think about this, sort of identity piece, and having just gone through a rebrand, I have a different identity crisis. Not that kind of identity crisis, but around who are the people, what can they log into, administrative access, all the things that we should be considering when we're working with our customers as an MSP. And so, today's talk is kind of all around that, what if as an air traffic controller that is in charge of all of the planes flying around, right? And as Jesse went up and got his cup of coffee, I can run over there, or as Matt Lee does, right, with the lock it up. Oh, look, someone hasn't protected their computer, right? And being able to take over those devices and So anyways, that's today's topic, all around identity access management. Let's just dive right in.
Yeah. So anyone who's been in MSP for a while or in cybersecurity for a while, a lot of these identity access vendors are relatively new, right? Okta on the enterprise side, CyberQP, CyberFox, right? All of a sudden identity services or vendors, are new and Tech ID Manager as well, right? Why is it, right? You think about 2020 COVID, right? Perimeter cybersecurity was all about the perimeter. Now identity is the new perimeter. I think I've heard Jesse say that before. So, zero trust access, right? Giving only, and Wes had a great post about this. What does zero trust access mean to anyone? And we got some pretty wild answers if you check out that post this week. Really about providing the least amount of access to the least amount of people, right? So that siloing your business, siloing your vulnerabilities and your exploits as well, and you're more resilient that way. So really, so today's episode, as Tim said, identity, what it means. We'll talk about all the acronyms. Hopefully, read through those, and also talk about where things are going. So. Martin, I think I kind of wanted to start with you first, but I know we don't usually talk about we don't have to talk about vendor names, but we'll talk about what gets you up in the morning and why you kind of founded the utility or the functions that you're providing to call it multi-vendor. You're not only dealing with MSPs, I'm guessing, but you're also dealing with anyone who needs multi-tenant identity access, right?
Yep. Anywhere where you have multiple people and need access to multiple things, and specifically when those multiple things should not be connected. So if you're like specifically that's MSPs and VARs where multiple technicians and access to multiple clients. Why did I think this is important? Well, I worked at an MSP for 12 years, and this is the only problem I didn't see any software that came out to solve. So quit. And like, there's a lot about multi-tenant access, which is different than like normal single company access. That's different. Like the need that at a single company, when somebody logs in, it's their account, they know it, they use it, they rotate their password regularly. It's only one thing to remember. But when a multi-tenant access situation has some significant different things going on.
Yeah, and Kyle Hansman and this ConnectWise vulnerability this week talked about like most of the outside world didn't really fully recognize like the one-to-many relationship with this multi-tenant aspect, right, of MSPs and people using ConnectWise tools, right? Same thing, people using Tech ID Manager, right? Like the one-to-many, it's not simply a sysadmin or an InfoSec team just provisioning identity out to one, right? You're many different companies they're managing. So that aspect, like if you screw up identity management, you screw up authentication, you're not affecting only one company but many. So Jess, you want to go?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to go and take a quick step back because I was thinking about this leading up to this episode and how fundamentally different the landscape is around identity and how it drives almost everything we do in cybersecurity today, right? You think, and it's funny how I feel like as IT providers, cyber providers, managed service providers, whatever type of service you're providing, we kind of tend to put things on the back burner until they become really important. And I think we had clients coming up to COVID, and I think COVID just accelerated the trend, but we had clients on VPN, they weren't using identity to drive the security of their organizations. And then all of a sudden we got hit with this tidal wave, like, oh, we got to do something about that. But Martin, I'd like to hear your perspective, or Emily, if you have one as well. Do you think that it was COVID, or are we just kind of projecting that? When did this shift really start historically as you see it?
I saw it shift in 2015, 2016 when and that was really specific to my purview on the space. I was working at an MSP at that time, and that's when the MSP I was working with, when we went from 6 technicians at the beginning of that year to 18 technicians at the end of that year. And then we just kept growing from there. And that's when people started coming and going. And when you lose somebody and you don't have proper identity management,
right,
they had access to all these systems, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, I can't revoke their access. They walked off with like some important information. And then COVID did exacerbate that because of all the work from home. And COVID specifically exacerbated it with the school systems and proving that kids were who they were, taking tests and all the cheating that went on. And
our kids didn't cheat much.
Yeah.
Kids were out of school at that point. So
the schools had all kinds of identity management things that they tried to put in place. Does anybody, like any of the audience here, have identity that they have in place now that like really they think is the right way to do it, that applies? If so, put the comments down in the comments.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
It's interesting that you bring that up because my mom, who's now retired, was a teacher for her career. And I remember when they started going to Google Workspace and having to do the identities and segment that all on the phone. And of course, I was de facto IT support for mom. Those questions came, but I do remember that though, and you're right that's around when that shift started happening, and then of course COVID really accelerated it. But I think people want to say, well, it was COVID that did it. No, I think COVID was just an accelerant to a trend that was already in motion, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, COVID was an accelerant for lots of things.
Yeah, right.
When you start putting somebody behind a computer screen and they're not in front of you, then you really have to address that. Who is this person? Who is this identity?
Well, and it does become a massive problem, right? Especially if you don't have a a process or systems in place or you haven't thought through the ramifications of as your identity sprawl happens, right? Because you're playing hot plate, right? You're just kind of catching balls as they come. But just an example, like you said, as you grew, logging in and out of Microsoft tenants for clients as an MSP, right? Like that is just a nightmare. And then you have a client or two as security controls that says you can't be logged into another client or have those tokenized creds on your device, and you can't log into theirs until you clear your cache, reboot, and come back. So it becomes a big time waster in a lot of ways too. So how did you see not only increasing security, but how can this increase a multi-tenant approach increase efficiency for MSPs, right, and save them money or make them money?
Yeah, the efficiency comes with the automation that you can put around stuff, like when you can automate logging in, when you can automate creating those credentials, and you can automate rotating passwords, and you can automate as much of that as possible. So when the technician sits down, they're able to focus on the work they do, not on getting to that point where they do work.
Right.
Yeah. So when you do things like push MFA versus TOTP, it's real minor, but like they just click on their phone, say yes, go, instead of scrolling their phone, finding a number, typing it in. It's a difference between 2 buttons and 8 buttons, but it's a pretty big difference when you do it, like you said, 30 times a day.
There's that mental fatigue that comes in, right? It's only 2 seconds versus half a second, but I think you're expending brain bandwidth while you do those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, like the automation. I think that as much as I hate to use this phrase, AI is going to help MSP technicians do this by like recognizing what they're working on, helping them find how to get there and getting them there more quickly. Yeah.
Context aware. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch real quick to ZTNA because I think this is maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think identity and zero trust are kind of part and parcel, right?
Let's talk about all the acronyms too, right? Like DTA, right? So go ahead, Jesse.
So, I would thank you, Tim, because I generally chime in when somebody spits out an acronym, right?
Elon says acronyms are, they keep people, it's like
all right,
keep people out of the circle. You don't want to exclude anyone.
Yeah.
IAM is what?
Identity access management. Yep.
PAM is
privileged access management.
There are actually 2 for PAM.
There's 2 PAMs.
All right, let's hear
There
it.
is privileged access management, which is what we all talk about all the time. That's what you see all over the internet. There's also privileged account management.
Oh, right. Yeah, good point. Well, that's a good segue. Emily, what do you see, because you guys are kind of at the forefront, right? MSPs bring you in, they're like, hey, we want you to solve this problem. They buy your product, and then you're working with them. Where do you see the biggest pain points as you go and start helping these customers?
That they're just behind the ball. They're just trying to make, they're growing and they don't have time to think about these things. So to even bring on a new product is a big time spend for them. The biggest problem we have, we'll have clients or future clients that really want to use us, but we're like, we just don't have the time right now. We're implementing these 2 things. We'll put you on the list. We'll see you in a couple months. And that definitely happens. But yeah, all the time to just almost catch up, but you're not really catching up because once you've caught up, you're still behind.
How are they, and Martin, you can answer this, Martin. How are they doing it now? Like, Pat, is there basically 5 admins in a room and there's 5 passwords and credentials and they're just kind of passing them around in a notebook or
So I've seen many ways to do it. The worst way is there's 1 admin account and 1 password everywhere that everybody has memorized. So when a technician comes on board, you just tell them that password. I've also seen password vaults with a different password per client that never changes. I have seen Excel spreadsheets. We helped a guy go from an Excel spreadsheet that literally had every user's name and password in it and the admin password to their network. He brought it up on the screen and showed it to me, and I was like, I don't want to see it. And then there are other solutions on the market, password vaults. Like you mentioned, some of them, Evo, CyberQP, us, Psychotic, Delinea, CyberArk, Beyond Trust, Passport used to be one, ID Identifier, ID Agent, ID Portal, I think was one. There have been a lot of people that attempted to address this. And MSPs kind of get left in the wake because it's a much more difficult problem because of the multi-tenancy. CyberArk, Beyond Trust, and Thycotic, they are great for one domain, one enterprise.
And do you want to break down kind of like where all those tools fall, right? So I mean, like, there's aspects of identity access management, right? There's authentication, which is like a bunch of other players like Duo and, you know, phishing resistant MFA, which we're really excited about and always kind of talking about here. But how do they all kind of fit together, right? Like with those admin tools. I know there's some crossover because I've seen demos from, you know, some of the ones you've mentioned, but like how do they fall? Like, talk about service accounts. But you know, how does it all fit together, right? Like, and is it necessary to have, is there one tool to solve them all, or is there not that you can think of, right? Like you're going to have to use a couple.
So for an MSP, there's no one tool that just fits all for most MSPs. If you're an MSP who cookie cutters all your clients and says you must have this machine with this type of code, and you have these type of laptops, and you only have this type of access, and you only have this type of software, if you cookie cutter all of your clients, they could all match. You could have one solution. But most MSPs that I'm aware of, they have different clients, different architectures. So you need a multiple of tools. I need tools that best scale out and have the biggest option pool on the things they do. But you'll definitely need more than one tool set because there's no tool set that does it all. And there's the starting point for which tools you need really needs to be your compliance, your cybersecurity compliance, your cybersecurity posture. How do you think it should be done? What controls do you need to meet? And then like go forward from there. Do I need just-in-time access? Do I need accounts? Do I have machines that are always online? Do I have machines that might be offline that I still need access to? And if that's the case, then those are two different types of accounts and two different types of access you need. So like
go back to that just-in-time access, because I think that's like a complex concept that, you know, it sounds relatively new as well.
It is like the latest, hottest thing, the new shiny object when it comes to privileged account management. It has some benefits. It also has risks. Just-in-time access is where when a technician wants access to a client, they do something on their side over the internet, then that account access gets created. That means that you don't have standing privilege. We do this, CyberQB does this, Evo does this, Thycotic does this, Delinea does it, CyberArk does it. Everybody does it. They do it in different ways.
What's the advantage of that? You said standing privilege. So like standing privilege means it's just like always on.
It means the account's always there.
Yeah.
And the accounts, like there are advantages and disadvantages to that. If you have an account that's always on with standing privilege and you're rotating the password, it can be just as safe. Mm-hmm. The standard attack vectors, the reason people downplay standing privilege is because of attack vectors with stale passwords or somebody looking over your shoulder and seeing you type in a password. There are all types of ways to mitigate that. MFA, conditional-based access, even AI that looks at where you're coming from and make sure that your current access matches the access patterns you've used in the past. All of that can protect standing access just as well as just-in-time access. And even just-in-time access has issues related to it with token interception, hash catching, internet-based attacks where there's some internet entity that is telling this machine to make the account. That's just one more vulnerable point.
Yeah.
The standing access just-in-time, they're really half dozen one or the other. You can look at your position, what your clients need, what cybersecurity frameworks you need to adhere to, and then pick your approach from that.
That's great to know. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a little bit overhyped. As you said, like there's, what do they call that? Offsetting controls, right? That can basically make one, you know, there's, as you said, advantages to both.
Yep.
Any more acronyms in here, Tim? Federated is one I hear. SSO, right? Like single sign-on, right?
SSO, Federated, GDAP. There are a bunch of acronyms.
Talk about Federated and what was that, GDAP? I don't think I've heard that one.
GDAP is, or Federated is where one or multiple authentication things all go back and ask one authentication thing. Is this person allowed to log in? Like all the computers on a domain are federated to the domain controller. They all ask it for the authentication. You can also do forest trusts and do federated trust that way. SSO, it's single sign-on. Single sign-on is a type of federation where you have one account that you sign on that then gives you access to all these different authentication sources. GDAP is Microsoft, or was Microsoft's thing where you logged into one Azure tenant and you connect client Azure tenants to your Azure tenant and then use that to get access. The G Suite has a very similar thing for federated access from MSPs to their client networks.
Yep.
The Google Suite one is really good. The GDAP one for Azure has some issues where you can't do everything via GDAP, so you still need an account directly in that Azure tenant to do lots of things. There are tons of ways. That
GDAP says this granular delegated admin privileges. I've never heard that. Yeah.
Yep.
Really? Oh, yeah. We talk a lot about GDAP when we talk about dealing with Microsoft Graph, and our good friend Kelvin has CIPP, the new partner portal. Just do that and be done with that part, because he's got that nailed when it comes down to it. But as far as federated access, y'all know when I was at the MSP, I dealt with federal government contracts, and I progressively watched them over the years. So a year or less, maybe 2 years, as we not only built our web applications to support the things that we were doing for the feds, they started to roll out login.gov, right? If you don't know what login.gov is, it is a federated system for identity access management, IAM, to deal with all of those disjointed things, all of those, identity places of where people live, to bring it into one centralized location. And here's an interesting piece. As a military veteran, I set up my ID.gov to get into ID.me, which allows us certain benefits, right? So I had it all signed up under my personal email address. It posed a really unique challenge when I needed to build that system out again, using my government ID, using my government stuff, and associating with it's still me, but I had a .gov email address. So it was really a bit of a challenge for me personally. But here's the thing. And I kind of brought this up in a couple of the, ISSO, the security officer meetings, and maybe Martin, you can, or Emily, can talk a little bit about it, right? A fear that I had was, great, they're taking all these disjointed pieces across the internet, internally, externally, and they're putting them all into one bucket, one federated system, right? What is that federated system doing to make sure that it's protected? Because, bad things happen, stupid things happen, people click on wrong stuff. If that one system gets compromised, this was that multi-tenant conversation. What happens? We just federated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things into one point of failure.
Yeah. It's a very interesting question when you tie all those things together, that even scales down to the MSP, where they're tying, if you do federated single sign-on access to your client networks, and you have lawyers, dentists, doctors, and body shops, you're depending on the security at the body shop to protect your federated account that's single sign-on that links into a doctor's office. So it's a really tough decision to go single sign-on, because it's tricky, it's hard. And every week you'll read single sign-on with MFA and conditional access is very easy to protect. But every week you can read about hackers who can easily bypass MFA, and they can use VPNs to get by conditional access. And they'll use MFA fatigue attacks to get people to click on, yes, this is me, when it really wasn't. And then social engineering things. So it still comes down to that person protecting their single sign-on account and all the things around it. And so, I think it's a big risk.
Love that, right? Because I'm going to take this a little step further with login.gov. Now that I'm no longer at the MSP and I'm not dealing with any of that on my .gov addresses, I wanted to go and rent a car because, it's one of the benefits, blah, 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 I get a little discount. And now when I logged in as me, it actually went and had me go through a whole new process. And I had to use my face and my driver's license to not recreate, but sort of re-enable and reset up my account. I had to give them a government photo ID and my webcam to set up my account. So plus my two-factor, plus my password. It was almost like 4 levels of, are you who you really say you are, and do you have an ID to prove that, and does your face match? And I think even now with Auth0, for example, we use Auth0 that we standardize on. I see that happening at Auth0. I see that happening more and more frequently, where it's give us some kind of validated.
Talk about Auth0 as well, like what they do.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yep. Keep going.
Give us some kind of third-party validated photo identification and match it to your face.
Which is really scary in the context of the AI image generation and video generation that's going on.
I know.
It
seems like the iPhone, the old one's better with the fingerprint.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. So anyways, it's just been interesting to kind of watch these things progress over the last couple of years. As I think we talked about earlier, identity is like the new perimeter, right? We have a whole list of acronyms here, right? RBAC, role-based access controls, zero trust, blah, blah, blah. I kind of want to maybe get into, and Tim, correct me if you're wrong.
RBAC is, so rewrite, some people can only read, some people can write, right? Like that's basically what level of privileges do you have with RBAC, role-based access control? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah.
No, I was just.
I've always thought of. No, just a quick rider on that. It's like with RBAC and the principle of least privilege, right? Zero trust really is a framework to try and actually have principle of least privilege deployed in your network. That's the way I see it, or deployed in your systems, right?
Yeah.
Zero trust network access just simply says you can't just connect to the VPN and get everything. Although if you take a zero trust network access product and configure it that way, you're not doing anything really special. So really what you're doing with zero trust is you're defining limits and context around what resources people are accessing and then putting authentication rules around that. And so really the goal of zero trust is to actually enact the principle of least privilege or role-based access control. So sorry, Tim, go ahead and bring that up.
No, I was just going to say that dives right into Martin's, right? So least privileged on service accounts, like there's no human behind that, quote unquote. So like maybe talk a little bit about that, service accounts.
Yeah. So like the service accounts, I have 2 thoughts on that, and one of which is a little controversial. Service accounts are those accounts that you run something automatically on, and it needs to have access to some set of resources, something like that. So most people will set it up. They'll create a user, they'll give it some rights, usually full rights to anything it wants, and then they'll set a password and just put it in that service entry and let it run. And then they document that password somewhere and move on with life. Well, that service entry password is readily readable from anybody who has administrative access on that machine. So it becomes this entry point. So there are several things you can do from a rights and roles perspective to protect that service account. You can make it not long onable. You can make it have to change its password. You can put some automation around rotating that password and not telling it to people, or if you do it more regularly. But the second thing there is a little more controversial and less known is when you run a service on a machine, you can actually have it authenticate as that machine. And then you can give that machine access to the resources it needs access to. So there is absolutely no human usable account associated with that service it's running, which is the way you should do it. But it's also less known, and most people don't do that. And then one more thing to go back to that zero trust. I love the zero trust mentality, but I also want to point out that there are 3 ways to identify something, to confirm who you are. You can do something and this is like long-standing philosophy on computer interaction, something that you know, something that you have, or something that you are the 3 types of authentication. Zero trust is the machine implementation of one of those 3 factors for doing something. So like for the VPN, zero trust is often implemented as it has to come from this IP address. Well, that's something that you are. You are at this IP address, So those same 3 principles, something you have, something you are, something that you know, are really just need to be applied more. And multi-factor is just picking 2 of them.
Then you have FIDO key.
Yeah, something you have.
Phone.
Yeah. Fingerprint, something you have. Facial recognition, something that you are.
Yeah. So what's the biggest risk of not doing it correctly, like as an MSP? Is it having one service account that everyone's sharing? Is that what you're getting at? And with multiple machines, right? So it's not tied to like, oh, there's only one browser or one machine that can.
The biggest issue with a service account that runs some service on a machine is that a hacker will get access to that machine in some way, even some minimal access. And then that will grant them access to see the service account and service account password. And if that service account is misset up and has domain admin privileges to log in anywhere, all of a sudden they can go anywhere they want from breaking one machine, minimal access on it. Is that
Lateral.
escalation of privilege is the biggest issue with a service account.
So before, I don't want to beat a dead horse.
I laugh because Tim, you'll.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry guys. No, Tim, I was just laughing because you'll probably remember this is, offboarding a client or offboarding a client IT guy or something like that. You get those emails. Oh, the client domain admin password is changing across all the customers today. Update your password managers, right? And that's unfortunately that's the way we were doing it, 10 years ago. But that's exactly what you're talking about when you.
I'm sorry. I have a little anecdotal story if we're okay with me taking 2 minutes. So we good with that?
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
So I was leaving the MSP, right? Obviously, to build out compliance scorecard. I was at a conference, planned, blah, blah, blah. And when you close your lid of your laptop, you pack it in your suitcase, your bag, because you're going to open it on the plane, you close it back. Anyways, you get so I hadn't turned it off. And I got to the hotel, got settled in. I got a message like, hey, I got to deal with something. So I flip open the laptop, turn on the VPN, get on the Wi-Fi. And like everything else, things start connecting to the internet. Right? Teams and this and that and this. And I'm like, I got 10 minutes to fix this thing before I have to go. And I Control-Alt-Delete to try to disable this, disable that, turn that, so I can just go do the thing I needed to do because all the things are starting to connect. And I couldn't Control-Alt-Delete. And I'm like, what? And then fine, reboot. And then I was like, and I couldn't open this and I couldn't open that and I couldn't do it. They pammed me while I was away. So the minute that device connected to the network and connected through the VPN and it pushed down the new stuff, they revoked all my administrative privilege. And I guess I taught them well, but I was like, now I can't work. So the note here is, privileged access, making sure that the right person has the right level of access at the right time, right? And so I was leaving the MSP. I was traveling outside of our general area. Even though I had a job to do, I might have been the right person in the wrong spot, right? Whether or not it was the right time. So, for us as MSPs, that's the kind of thing we want to try to make sure we're dealing with. Right. Jesse, you said, so-and-so's leaving, update your password manager. I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is that? Right. When we decided to start rolling these things out, I was astonished at global admin, like the regular admin account in the entire domain, where it was. Just inventorying where it was. And the quickest thing that we did was like, let's just disable it and see what breaks. And boy, that was a bad day.
Yeah.
That's where a SIM is helpful, right? Because you can see what passwords are being used or what logins are being used where and things like that. But no, I think to your point, I was talking about that when we started making our push and pushing for SSO, pushing with clients. It's something I wanted to talk about with you, Martin and Emily, because this is something that's an added expense, right? It's for our client safety. It's for our, we do gain some efficiencies out of it. But I know when we started going to our clients and starting to talk about, we need to sell you an additional service for SSO, that was always the question we got, right? Is, well, I don't want all my passwords linked to one thing, because what if they get access to one thing? They have access to everything. And so overcoming that objection was a big part of it. There's the additional cost because, doing an SSO offering and wrapping services around it is not cheap. It's an additional expense. And how do you show the value of that to a client? So I guess I wanted to talk to you guys today and see, how are your partners positioning this? How are they selling it? How are they having success selling managed identity and delivering this type of service to their clients?
The biggest piece is the cyber insurance and the cybersecurity requirements that the MSP's clients are running into. Like the Cyber Essentials or Cyber 8 guidelines in Australia, like they end clients are actually coming to the MSP and saying, hey, we had an audit done and we saw a single admin account that looks like it's used by multiple people. You have to change that. We failed the audit, or we got this exception on the audit because of this. Let's fix this. In a lot of cases, it's really the clients coming to the MSPs after an audit or after some sort of cybersecurity look, and they're saying, hey, this needs to be changed. And then that MSP is then going to all of his other clients and saying, hey, look, we're fixing this. We have quite a few clients who actually use it as a small part of their security posture. And they'll say, hey, let's look at your network now. The current MSP you have, there's one admin account. How many people are using that? We as an MSP, they'll say, we as an MSP, we have unique accounts. You can clearly see John from our MSP, Tim from our MSP. They're the one that did this thing. We have traceability and accountability all over the place. So it elevates, as Matt Lee is always saying, we raise the tide for all the MSPs when one of them just starts going out there and says, look, we have all this traceability. And then clients are much more on board with it.
What other, Martin and Emily, you could probably answer this as well, but in terms of the extra layers, the conditional access, the MFA, do you guys have recommendations to complement your tool, right? Like what other things do you strongly recommend that they do? Are you using like YubiKeys or like phishing resistant MFA? Are you any other kind of, some password managers, like, right, you can just kind of go down the list of all the things that are kind of no-brainers, right? Just the complex passwords are a thing of the past, right, when you're using a password manager. So
so like for us, like complex passwords, some sort of MFA, and unique accounts for everybody are really the basis of it. Complex passwords and unique MFA and a managed account and a regular password rotation pattern. The issue with passwords always has been is they'll get stale. Somebody will steal a file. They'll spend time offline breaking that. And how long does it take to break a password nowadays? It's super short. So you have to have regular password rotation. And then you layer on top of that MFA or some other identity access thing.
Some components are like not for rotation just because like you end up with the same, I don't know. I guess with the password manager, it doesn't matter. You're not going to know it anyway, but like they're against rotation because you're just like, oh, I'm doing Jesse 123, and now I'm doing Jesse 124, like whatever.
So like that is one of the like hot buttons for me is, and I'll try not to rant about it, but I will point out that don't rotate your passwords is the headline for an article, and very few people have actually read that article. That study actually said, don't force people to make up new passwords and rotate them because they fall into those Jesse 123 situations. The article also says, for good security, use complex passwords and rotate them very frequently. And then use a password vault to remember them or password manager. Because the best security, the reason to rotate passwords is that if the password file is stolen, it can't be hashed offline or broken offline and used, rotate passwords. But the psychology of people says don't force people to manually rotate and make up passwords. So there's a big distinction in the market and a big misunderstanding in the market about what that one article from Microsoft, probably 7 or 8 years ago now, the research work behind it, what it really said.
But there is a NIST. Isn't there a NIST update or a NIST note on this as well, saying that it's not that you like. I thought there was a NIST update, right, Tim, where they were saying that.
Yeah,
but to your point, Martin. Yeah, to your point, Martin. I think that's exactly right. It's not like, oh, we don't have to rotate passwords. Job done. We create complex passwords. We create unique passwords. That's a big piece of we don't have to rotate passwords, is that we have a unique password for every single account, right? Because that way, if a password's compromised, then we rotate that one, right? And that stops us from like, oh, we have Jesse 123 exclamation point, to meet the complexity requirements. So yeah, I think you're dead right about that. And just oh yeah, Tim just was talking about passphrases, right? And I was going to bring that up as well. So
Yeah.
a passphrase style password, if you have to create one, like for your master vault, for your password vault, that's a good way to go about it. But Tim, why don't you expound on that a little bit?
No, I mean, so in working with my family and talking about passwords, right? And so, we have a new granddaughter, we're setting up like the things, and I'm like, we need to create a password to, a passphrase to protect, I don't want somebody logging into the camera, whatever, right? The things. And so, and we're having this conversation, and I'm like, yeah, you can't use that. But here's the interesting part. As she was trying to set this up, right, and she was putting in, some variation of things that she's used in the past, and the app kept telling her, you can't use that. Not enough characters, not enough letters, not enough randomization. You can't use, Tim Pepe 123. Like, it was really interesting that the app was literally forcing her into like creating a phrase, like creating something beyond just the, Tim 123. There you go. Thanks, Trey. Yeah. That's funny. But truth be told, everybody either has a favorite book or a favorite song or a favorite artist, right? And so I'll use this as an example, and it is not the password that I use, but the phrase when I'm teaching people about good passphrases is, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, and changing a couple of those letters and a semicolon here and there, and zeros with an O. Like, pick a phrase, pick a favorite book.
That's a big risk though, because like they're going to use the same phrase like multiple places, right? So
it is possible.
Password manager still kind of has that complex uniqueness. Like,
yeah. Obviously, using a password manager is ideal, and there's always lots of conversations on which one to use. I have my favorite. We all have our favorites, but pick one.
Yeah, as long as it's not LastPass.
I had a question that I wanted to ask. That I wanted to ask Martin here and say, because I think this is a good way to think about it. You worked as an MSP. You know what MSPs deal with. You've lived that world. That's probably what, in a lot of ways, spawned you to build this product that you did. Yep. Let's talk about if you had to go build an identity framework for an MSP. You're starting an MSP, and you got to build an identity framework for it. Talk about high level how you'd set that up and how you'd be thinking about it to give some people some tips as they do this.
I think my thoughts on that are a little unique because I am uber security focused, and I'll actually give up some efficiency for security. MSPs, because they access so many different clients, and you don't want any movement laterally between clients. That would be the death of an MSP. My old boss at the MSP used to say, like, we don't want to end up on the front of the newspaper for having one of our clients hacked into and then another one hacked into. So I would start with a framework that was SSO for everything internally to a company. And then I would silo every company and use some automation to make the accounts and automation around identity management, tying it to people at the MSP so that it's, from an MSP's perspective, when you fire a technician, you need, before they can walk from your office where you say you're fired to the front door. Well, that's what it used to be. Nowadays, it's like on a Zoom screen. When you say you're fired, you need their access to all be revoked before they can move their mouse over to some other window and start stealing data.
Well, now, Martin, we're supposed to say we're transitioning you out of the business now.
I did.
Just joking. No. So that makes sense to me. So as you were talking, I'm thinking like, okay, then how do we handle the RMM, right? Because yes, we can cut off their access to the RMM, but the RMM has hooks into every single client and sidesteps that SSO piece. How do you handle that?
If I had my druthers, I would
Yeah.
make the RMM only execute as the individual who requested that command to be run. The RMM would spawn, from a technical perspective, the RMM would span off a separate task that would then change its user to be the user that requested the thing to be run, and it would run as that user. And the user would have to put in their credentials for that environment so that RMM could convert the executable to that user. And then the authentication mechanism and the security mechanisms in that environment would be protecting that environment from whatever the RMM ran. So if you trusted that individual in one place only, that's all they got access.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. Keep the SSO segmented, but then federate the SSO for that client through the RMM requests, and almost like a PAM type of thing.
Some sort of account management. That's
that's wild. Can we get that feature? When can we get that?
We don't have an RMM, but like that is the way in my opinion, that's the way it should be done. When you execute,
it's a good idea.
Something to execute, it should execute as you.
Right.
Yeah. That way, all the logs match. Any sort of forensic audit on that client. Says, oh, Martin did that. Martin requested that was the RMM transition to being Martin. Martin did that.
Yeah, I like that.
Then you'd also be like, there's a lot that goes into that, but no RMM does that right now. Like they all just execute a system and then they make logs about who did what that you have to go look somewhere else for.
How about I really take us down a rabbit hole and say, do you see the death of the RMM on the horizon because of this?
No, I do not. The efficiency scale for an RMM is just, the efficiency is just too massive.
What happened to my camera?
You knocked it down.
Yeah.
I got so irritated with me getting off topic here.
Yeah.
Just came up.
Isn't that an AI camera? Didn't
It
Elon
is.
Musk say something about AI killing society slowly?
All right, there we go. Damn thing! I thought you were going to yell at me and tell me my camera was messed up.
So that's interesting. Then, pragmatically, what's a good way for MSPs to start thinking about? You don't have that ability with our RMM, but what's a good way for MSPs to start thinking about protecting this and doing things that can mitigate those types of risks from an identity perspective?
Make everybody their own identity everywhere they need access. Never share an account.
Okay.
Stop sharing admin accounts. Like that is when you get to that from both a technical and a psychological perspective, there's a lot of security. When you realize that even though you might not mentally comprehend it, subconsciously, if you know everything you're doing is traced to you, you're you had that a little bit of extra edge of, I'm going to do this securely. I love to point out the Uber hack that happened last year. Like the point of escalation for that Uber hack, from what I read, was a script that had a shared administrator username and password in it, where they got in, but they didn't really do any damage until they saw the script, which had a plain text password in it, and that's where it escalated and took off. If everybody had their own identity, they would not have put their name and their password in that script.
Yeah.
If there was something like multi-sig, right? If there was multiple admins that had would that be I think that might be like a little bit of a compensating control. Like if you had shared admins, not like 10 people sharing it, but 5 or 3 or there are still some benefits, right? But how do you kind of, as you said, like you're striving for efficiency and least friction. So like, how do you get to kind of like a happy medium? So
automation,
computers and automation can help you get all that efficiency. Yeah, it's funny because the guys from Shield, Teddy, he always talks about when they do pen tests. He's like it's like 90% that you're going to find a service account with the password and notes for it in a pen test. And I will say, one of the largest incidents I worked, guess what we found? We were doing our forensics. So that's more prevalent than you would think. And so I think simple things like that, like I like your point about changing the culture and changing the way we think about, like, we're doing things securely, and we're going to do that extra 2 minutes to make sure that we're being secure. And once you get to that point and you're executing it from a swallow the frog perspective, then the benefits and the efficiency gains with tools and everything else start to fall into place, right? So I think you're right about that, and I think that's a good approach. Oh, what do we have here from John? There was a secret server admin that put his password in plain text. So since the account was a secret server, oh geez, wow, yeah, that's wild.
I think he was referring to the MGM thing, right? Is that what he was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for the Uber.
Yeah.
So
That was.
yeah, as we wind down here, I know we wanted to get to this, and I kind of took us on a little walkabout. But Martin, I just want to hear a little bit more about your story, how you came from working in an MSP to starting Tech ID, and just tell us about the journey here. I always like to hear people's journeys into how they got where they're going in their entrepreneurial journey. So I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So like I graduated from Clemson University with a computer engineering degree many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in software literally all over the world, in Europe and Malaysia and the US. I wrote automation software for industrial automation, robots making things. I wrote software for business systems, accounting systems, web pages, things like that. My entire career has been automating things, to integrating things to make people more efficient. And then for 12 years, I was the head of a development wing attached to an MSP. In those 12 years, I saw security go from something nobody cared about to something I was really hyper focused on.
Mm-hmm.
Privileged account management, in my opinion, was completely missed in that security transition. Every MSP I talked to had one administrative account that they shared with all the technicians. So in 2017, 2018, I looked around the market and said, hey, I'd like to fix this for the MSP I'm working with. What is there to fix it? I figured I would find some software, apply it to the MSP, and move on and find the next problem to fix. I found Thycotic, CyberArk, Beyond Trust, all phenomenal products. If you have one domain and 100,000 users, you should go buy those products. They do some phenomenal things. But for an MSP, where you have multiple technicians, access to multiple different environments, different machines, domains, Azure tenants, all different things, those products did not apply very well. So 2019, I quit my job. I started Ruffian Software and rewrote Tech ID Manager to do privileged account management under that auspice that you shouldn't share admin accounts. Everybody needs their own account. For an MSP, to do this requires a significant amount of automation. So that's what Tech ID Manager does. We automate that privileged account management, creating accounts, keeping them standing or managed, creating them just in time, setting passwords and rotating passwords, and setting rights so that you truly have least privilege access on every person's account specific to that person, that role-based access thing, that zero trust thing. And we do all this with a significant amount of encryption and security because we have really several founding tenets. Two of my favorite founding tenets are: we don't keep keys to your networks, your kingdoms, and we are not going to be the point of ingress. Like, we can't see any of your data. We don't keep keys. Like, yeah,
Nice.
we don't insert ourselves in the authentication process. A lot of other subtle things like that that really help. That's my background story. That's what we do. Come check us out.
So it was like a lot of other things I hear from MSP folks who have started the entrepreneurial journey. It was out of frustration. If I had to boil that down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing here for this. I'm going to start it. That's great.
And there was a moment after I left. After I left the MSP, I was driving down I live way out in the country. I was driving down this back road, and I pulled up beside this old, like Tim's little side stories here. I pulled up beside this old 1950s truck, and there was a guy in overalls with his arm hanging out the window, and he had a tattoo on his arm. And the tattoo on his arm happened to be the admin password that I last knew at the MSP I was working with.
Wow.
He got tattooed on his arm?
Awesome.
The owner of the MSP liked to take Bible verses, shorten them up, and then put the chapter and the verse number after the name of the book.
Right.
And that happened to be what was tattooed on the guy's arm. Exactly.
Wow.
I took a picture and sent it to my friends who are still working on the MSP. I'm like, is this your password vault?
That's wild.
Emily. So I was going to just give Emily the floor here for a couple of seconds, a minute or two. So we've been geeking out on all the acronyms and all the fun tech stuff here. From your perspective, from an account management, like what are some of the challenges that you're seeing, MSPs are asking you about? Maybe talk a little bit about like your side of it, please.
It's always the new features that they want. Just in time is new for us. It wasn't part of our product in the beginning. Now it's the buzzword. It definitely does a thing that they need. I think they focus on that too much sometimes.
Mm.
They really need to. It's kind of like when your math teacher says, "This is great. This is the right answer," but show your work. Understand how you got there.
Interesting. Yeah. And so do you feel or do you see like a lot of your MSPs, coming like, do they even have a process in place or the people in place? I know you mentioned time as a challenge for them earlier, right? But as they operationalize this, do they have the people? Do they have the process? Do they have like a plan to roll these things out?
I see it all over the place. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they think they do. And then they read some of our literature and they say, oh, that isn't quite the way I thought I was doing it, and
Mhm.
make the changes they need.
I see.
It's
And
it's a
so
really good point. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, we talk a lot about here on Team Tim about people and process, right? And so, selling a gym membership without ever talking to the personal trainer or even setting in the gym to use the equipment, right? And so, as we look to try to help better protect our customers, better protect their identity, bring these different tool sets into place, as we start to wind down here right now, I'm going to kind of bounce around and give everybody their opportunity to give their one key takeaway because that's how we roll here. So, Jesse, are you ready with your one key takeaway? You want to kind of start with you, or do you want me to move others?
No, I'm ready. I got it for you.
Okay.
So, as we were talking today and thinking through this, and I was thinking through my journey of building an identity service for our service and product for the MSP that I worked as a CISO for, it really occurred to me that this is something, and from what Emily said, this is something that you can't just kind of just put the tool in and figure it out later. You have to take some time and really think through the approach, think through things like how does this work with our RMM? If we're doing SSO and we have a wide open RMM configuration or wide open tool configuration, we're not doing anyone any favors. So I think it really needs to be what both Emily and Martin have said of taking a holistic approach to it, making sure it's part of the culture, part of the process, part of the way we govern from a personnel perspective, but then using the tool to facilitate that after we've decided on what the approach looks like. So to shorten that, tactics over tools.
Tactics over tools. Thank you so much.
Yep.
What about you, Mr. Tim?
Yeah, so I'm the one that made that comment. CIS controls 4 and 5, very low of the 1 through 18 here. So this is something that's incredibly important. You've got a submarine, you've got multiple compartments, and you don't want them to all get flooded at once. So how do you segment? And that's what Zero Trust is all about. So this is incredibly important. Jesse said tactics over tools, and this is more important than things that are further down in that control list. So if you don't have it enabled in some form, don't share admin accounts, and then do all the other compensating controls, as Martin mentioned as well.
And Emily, your one key takeaway, please.
I'm going to go back to show your work, understand what your products are doing. I think
Yeah.
we all feel like at some points that things aren't working, like even with the new ConnectWise issue in the last couple of weeks, things weren't exactly the way we thought.
Good stuff. And Martin, last but not least, let me bring you up on here.
I am way deep in the whole PAM identity management thing, and there are lots of different ways to look at it, and anything that always need to learn and look, and like there's always a lot of different viewpoints to the situation, a lot of different ways to solve it, and it's important to look around.
Good stuff. And my key takeaway is make sure you have a really good password, like Trey was saying over here. Move from the password to the passphrase, and whatever you do, don't tattoo it on your arm like Martin had shared earlier. Oh my goodness. Hey, Team Tim here. Let me just bring this up real quick. I think next week next week we have something really interesting going on here next week. I won't be there, but we'll have Mr. Miller running this on for us next week, and Tim as well. So next week, Roddy. So Mr. Schnurr, you want to tell us a little bit?
Roddy Bergeron, right? So he's been definitely someone very notable in the channel, who worked at some big cybersecurity outfits, and this is a conversation that we started at IT Nation last year, talking about really selling security to someone who's not technical, right? And like constantly having that conversation. So excited to follow this one up from, something we pounded pretty hard on in 2023.
I'm a little bummed I won't be there to join you all next week.
You might be there.
I don't know. We're at Right of Boom next week. It depends. If I can pop in live from Right of Boom, who knows?
There you go.
So we're a minute over. The time crunch guy here. Thanks everybody. Thank you so much. Do the things. No, wait, here, do this.
Subscribe now.